When someone ignores you, your first instinct is almost primal. You want to be seen, to be acknowledged, to make sure you still exist in the eyes of another. Panic sets in like a tide rising too quickly, and suddenly every thought in your head is no longer your own, but oriented toward them. Should I send another message? Did I say something wrong? What can I do to make them look at me again? That urgent, restless desire to be noticed becomes the fatal trap. At that very moment, the balance of power tilts. Without realizing it, you surrender your emotional authority and hand it to the very person who has withdrawn. It is not just a modern affliction. Across history, from the courtly dances of Renaissance Europe to the etiquette of Victorian drawing rooms, one could see how silence and absence carried as much weight as words. A lady averting her gaze or a gentleman withholding a letter could send waves of desperation through the recipient, shifting power dynamics instantly. What we think of as a personal slight in the 21st century, being left unread in a text message, was once the unspoken language of refusal in centuries past. And always the desperate response was the same: chase harder, prove worth, plead for attention. Carl Jung believed this instinct was not random. He explained that the human psyche is governed by unconscious processes that force us to repeat patterns again and again until we learn their lessons. To be ignored is not only a present pain, it is also the echo of an old wound. Acting out of desperation means acting from that wound. When you hurl yourself toward someone who has stepped away, you are not merely reaching for their attention. You are reenacting an ancient drama where abandonment feels like death. And so the cycle perpetuates. You check the phone again as if glowing screens carry salvation. You overanalyze a paused conversation, replaying each word until it loses meaning. You write drafts of messages, delete them, and write them again. You are not in control. You are possessed. In Jung's language, this is archetypal behavior. The ignored lover is not merely a person. They become the child left alone in the dark, the exile outside the city walls, the figure at the edge of the village firelight, wondering if they still belong. There is a cruel paradox in this instinct. The more urgently you try to make the other person see you, the more invisible you become. Desperation is heavy. People sense it, like animals sense danger. You may think you are pulling them closer with your words, your gestures, your pleading. Yet your energy announces lack, emptiness, a vacuum that demands to be filled. Instead of attraction, it generates repulsion. The harder you grasp, the more they retreat. Jung's psychology illuminates this. He argued that what attracts others is not our insistence, but our authenticity. The very moment we bend ourselves into a shape that seeks approval, we lose the center of our being. We become an actor performing not for connection, but for validation. And those around us, consciously or unconsciously, recoil. To chase someone who has turned away is to announce, without words, "I am not enough without your recognition." That silent confession is heard more loudly than any plea could be. Consider history again. Monarchs did not beg their subjects for loyalty, because the very act of begging would undo their crown. Leaders who showed desperation lost their throne, not by force of arms, but by loss of aura. Even in everyday life, the same principle holds true. In high school corridors, the one who needed the crowd most was the one who was most easily dismissed. In offices, the colleague desperate for acknowledgement rarely receives it. The instinct to chase attention has always been a human reflex, but it has also always been a recipe for diminishing oneself. To understand this is to take the first step out of the trap. When someone ignores you, it feels as though their silence defines you. But what truly defines you is not their gaze. It is your relationship with yourself. Jung called this individuation, the process by which a human being becomes whole, no longer fractured by the need to be completed from the outside. Yet before that process begins, we all fall into the same ancient error. believing that if we just try harder, if we just demand more, if we just bend enough, someone else will finally see us. This is where the story begins, not with them, but with us, repeating a script we did not write, but inherited from wounds we never healed. To see this clearly is painful, but it is also liberating, because the moment you notice the trap, you can stop walking into it. The ache that rises when someone ignores you is sharper than most realize. It isn't just their absence that hurts, it is the flood of meaning your mind attaches to it. You begin to wonder, am I not valuable enough? Did I do something wrong? Am I unworthy of being seen? Beneath these thoughts lies the root wound, fear of abandonment. Jung argued that this is not a surface-level fear. It is embedded in the unconscious, formed long before we even had words. A child left crying in the crib too long, a father too distracted to notice a child's triumph, a mother's embrace withheld. All these early moments are recorded in the psyche. Later in life, when someone turns away, the alarm bells ring not just for the present moment, but for every past moment where invisibility felt like annihilation. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes essential. The shadow is the side of ourselves that we repress. The parts we disown because they clash with the image we want to project. We prefer to present ourselves as confident, self-sufficient, unshaken, but when someone ignores us, that facade crumbles. The hidden fear that we are unlovable, unworthy, unwanted, that is the shadow breaking through. And when it breaks through, we scramble to cover it, to silence it, to prove that we are worthy after all. That frantic effort, the chase, the desperate search for acknowledgement, it is the shadow at work, not our true self. Ancient myths captured this truth long before psychology gave it a name. Consider Narcissus, the youth who wasted away gazing into his reflection because he could not secure the love of another. His tragedy was not vanity, but abandonment. When Echo called to him and he dismissed her, she withered. When he realized no one returned his love, he collapsed into himself. Or think of Orpheus, who descended into the underworld, desperate to retrieve Eurydice. He had her almost within reach, but his fear of losing her again made him turn too soon. That single glance backward condemned her to vanish forever. In both myths, fear of abandonment drove action that sealed the very loss they dreaded. The digital world has created its own modern myths. The glowing last seen timestamp on a messaging app becomes today's oracle. You check it compulsively, searching for signs. Were they online and chose not to reply? Did they read the message and leave you in silence? Your heart races with every tiny clue. The ancient fear has only migrated into new forms, where once it was unanswered letters or missed meetings, now it is unread texts, unopened snaps, ignored comments. Technology has not healed the wound. It has given it a faster stage on which to play out. Jung insisted that when the shadow is not integrated, it rules us from the dark. This is why, when ignored, so many rush to send another message, scroll obsessively, or interpret every pause as rejection. We are not acting from love in those moments. We are acting from the wound, fear disguised as desire. A hunger not for connection, but for reassurance that we still exist in someone else's eyes. But the deeper truth is this: being ignored is not what devastates us. What devastates us is what we believe it means. The silence itself is neutral. It is our projection that makes it lethal. If we have not confronted the shadow, silence awakens it, and we are consumed by the fear that perhaps we are invisible, insignificant, or unworthy. If we have confronted it, silence becomes something else, a mirror. Instead of rushing outward to seek validation, we can turn inward and see what remains unresolved. It is no accident that so many spiritual traditions urged solitude and silence as a path to transformation. The Desert Fathers in early Christianity withdrew into caves and empty landscapes, not to escape people, but to confront the shadows that emerged in silence. Buddhist monks sat in meditation not to chase after answers, but to watch the restless craving of the mind. Silence, in this sense, is not rejection, but revelation. It shows us the parts of ourselves that still tremble when no one is watching. To face this fear of abandonment is to enter the most intimate battle of the human soul. It is not about convincing another person to return, but about daring to ask ourselves why their absence cuts so deeply. Until we do, the shadow will rule every reaction, and we will mistake fear for love again and again. When you chase someone who has pulled away, the effort feels noble at first. You tell yourself it is love, devotion, persistence. Yet beneath the surface, the energy being broadcast is not one of abundance, but of lack. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates in signals deeper than words, and others, whether they realize it or not, pick up on those signals. When your actions come from emptiness, the other person perceives not devotion, but desperation. Instead of drawing them closer, it drives them further away. This is not mysticism, it is biology. Human beings are exquisitely tuned to sense when someone is needy. Anthropologists studying tribal life noted how subtle cues determined rank and safety. A hunter who panicked when others withdrew trust was often sidelined because neediness suggested weakness. Even in the animal world, researchers found that submissive signals, tail-lowering, frantic chirps, pleading noises invite avoidance, not closeness. We may live in the digital age, but the old instincts remain. We recoil not from love, but from the heavy burden of someone demanding we fill their void. Imagine a conversation where every word you speak is not truly about you, but about the other person's hunger for reassurance. The air grows dense. Authenticity disappears. This is why neediness is repellent. It feels like a performance, not an encounter. Jung pointed out that individuation, the process of becoming whole in oneself, is the antidote. A person who is individuated carries themselves differently. They may still desire connection, but the desire does not disguise a wound. It emerges from fullness, not emptiness. Consider how attraction often works. When someone is secure in themselves, they do not beg for validation. Their presence alone communicates sufficiency. Think of historical figures who embodied this. Marcus Aurelius ruling Rome, yet reminding himself daily not to crave applause. Or Eleanor Roosevelt, who endured betrayal, yet carried herself with an authority that did not collapse into desperation. Their magnetism was not born of chasing attention, but of an inner solidity that made others lean closer. Contrast this with the modern phenomenon of double texting, where someone sends message after message, layering emojis and desperate humor, hoping for a response. On the surface, it looks like persistence, but the subtext, "I am incomplete without your reply," is the true message received, and it is rarely attractive. Neediness also distorts perception. When you are caught in it, you see rejection everywhere. A pause in conversation becomes an insult. A busy schedule feels like betrayal. A silence of hours feels like exile. In this state, your imagination becomes your enemy, spinning narratives of abandonment faster than reality can contradict them. The very energy of lack amplifies itself until it is all you project. Jung believed energy follows attention. If you pour your energy into chasing another, you drain yourself and signal your inner poverty. But if you turn that attention inward, something shifts. You begin to draw from your own source rather than begging from theirs. This is why individuation is not selfishness. It is the only way to end the cycle of repelling what you crave. Imagine two magnets. One is steady, charged, self-contained. The other is scattered, flickering, begging to be charged by anything nearby. The first magnet draws naturally, while the second repels through instability. Human relationships often follow this invisible law. Those who do not demand recognition, who do not wrap their worth around another's approval, radiate the very security others long for. It is easy to mistake this lesson for a tactic. If I just pretend to be independent, they will come back. But pretense is still neediness in disguise. The energy does not lie. Jung warned that the unconscious always reveals itself, no matter what mask we wear. Authentic individuation cannot be faked. It must be cultivated through the hard work of facing one's own shadow, one's own fear of abandonment. Only then does the energy of need transform into the energy of presence. And when that shift happens, the paradox unfolds. People notice you more when you no longer demand to be noticed. It is not magic nor manipulation. It is the natural response to someone who has reclaimed their center, someone who radiates wholeness instead of lack. The moment you step back, something remarkable begins to happen. What you feared would push the other person further away often creates the opposite effect. Jung spoke of psychic synchronization, the idea that when your inner state changes, the energy between you and another shifts as well. In the language of the everyday, this means that once you stop chasing, the other person suddenly starts noticing your absence. But here lies the paradox. It only works if the detachment is real, not a trick. Detachment, in this sense, is not about turning cold or playing games. It is about releasing the grip of fear. When you stop acting from the wound, you no longer radiate lack. Instead, you embody self-possession. History offers countless examples of this paradox in action. In ancient Rome, the Stoics practiced the art of letting go. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by war and intrigue, constantly reminded himself not to crave what he could not control. His detachment made him powerful, not because he was indifferent to the empire, but because he refused to be enslaved by it. People trusted a leader who could remain steady in storms. Across the world in Zen monasteries, monks trained in the discipline of detachment, not to abandon the world, but to free themselves from craving. Their calm presence drew followers, not because they sought disciples, but because serenity is magnetic. In both traditions, the paradox was the same. By relinquishing desperate attachment, influence deepened. In relationships, this paradox often reveals itself in small, ordinary moments. The friend who always waits for you, available at every call, becomes invisible over time. Their constant presence fades into background noise. But the moment they step away, pursue their own path, reclaim their time, you notice their absence like a missing note in a familiar song. Not because they are punishing you, but because they have shifted their energy. What was once taken for granted becomes suddenly precious. But beware, detachment cannot be wielded as a manipulation. If you withdraw simply to provoke a reaction, you are still ruled by need. The energy of lack seeps through, no matter how well disguised. Jung warned that the unconscious cannot be fooled. True detachment requires a deeper transformation, understanding that your worth is not tethered to another's recognition. Only when this truth settles in your bones does your energy shift in a way others can feel. Think of it as the difference between exile and retreat. Exile is forced, bitter, filled with longing for what was lost. Retreat is chosen, purposeful, filled with the intention of renewal. When you step back in exile, you silently cry, "Notice me." When you step back in retreat, you silently declare, "I am whole, with or without you." The first repels, the second attracts. The paradox of detachment is unsettling because it overturns our instincts. Every fiber of our being says, chase them, pull them back, prove yourself. But the truth, whispered through centuries of philosophy and confirmed in Jung's psychology, is the opposite. Step back, not to manipulate, but to remember who you are without their gaze. And in doing so, you often find that others begin to lean forward again. Every time someone's silence slices into you, the pain feels immediate, raw, like it belongs to the present moment. But Jung argued that the psyche is rarely reacting only to the present. It is pulling threads from the past. The anxious urge to send another text, to demand reassurance, to decode the silence, is rarely about this person. It is about the child you once were, standing unseen, waiting for recognition that never came. Psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, pioneers of attachment theory, confirmed this through decades of study. A child whose caregiver was inconsistent, sometimes attentive, sometimes cold, grew into an adult who feared abandonment yet longed for closeness. When a partner withdrew, it did not feel like a temporary pause. It felt like the same childhood wound reopening. The silence was not just silence. It was rejection, neglect, proof of unworthiness. Each ignored message or unanswered call became a reenactment of that early script. Jung described the unconscious as a realm where symbol and reality blur. This is why your mind does not distinguish between the present silence of a partner and the forgotten silence of a parent. Both are woven together into the same story. I am not enough unless someone sees me. The adult, you may laugh at the logic, but the child inside does not care for logic. That child only knows the ache of invisibility. Consider how this plays out in modern life. You refresh your inbox again and again, as if the glowing screen could deliver the warmth of recognition. You scroll through past conversations, analyzing punctuation marks for signs of rejection. A pause of hours feels like exile. Your rational mind tells you the person might simply be busy, but the shadowed child within screams abandonment. That is why your reactions feel so out of proportion. They are not just about today. They are about every yesterday you never resolved. This cycle is not new. Ancient literature is filled with figures haunted by the same repetitions. In Homer's Odyssey, Telemachus grows restless without news of his father. His insecurity pushes him into action, but beneath it lies the wound of a child unsure if he has been abandoned. In countless folk tales, the abandoned child wanders into forests, caves, or wilderness, not only seeking their parents, but seeking themselves. The repetition of abandonment is as old as storytelling itself, because it is as old as humanity itself. The tragedy is that when these childhood patterns go unexamined, they dictate adult choices. You may fall in love not with who someone is, but with how well they fit the script of inconsistency. You may chase those who withdraw, not because they are right for you, but because they keep the wound alive. Jung warned that until the unconscious is made conscious, it rules our lives, and we call it fate. The ignored text, the unanswered call, the withheld affection, none of these are random. They are threads of fate spun from childhood silence. But here lies the possibility of transformation. Once you begin to see the pattern, you can step outside of it. When someone ignores you, you can pause and ask, is this about them or is this about me? The pause itself is powerful. It interrupts the script. It gives the adult self a chance to soothe the child within, to say, you are seen, even if they do not see you. Each time you do this, you loosen the grip of the past. Still, the temptation to repeat is strong. The unconscious clings to what is familiar, even if it is painful. That is why people so often find themselves in the same relationship dynamics again and again. It is not masochism, it is the psyche's desperate attempt to rewrite the ending of an old story. Yet until the wound is confronted directly, the ending never changes. Silence always feels like abandonment. Absence always feels like rejection. And the child inside remains unheard. Jung believed individuation required not only recognizing these patterns, but embracing the shadow itself. That means allowing yourself to acknowledge the fear, the loneliness, the vulnerability that surfaces when someone ignores you. Not pushing it down, not masking it with anger or pretense, but facing it with compassion. Only then does the cycle begin to dissolve. The silence stretches, and your mind rushes to fill it. What began as a pause becomes a story, and that story grows darker with every passing hour. You tell yourself they are losing interest, that you must have done something wrong, that perhaps you are unworthy after all. And in that storm of thought, you begin to act, not from calm but from panic. You check their online status, refresh the inbox, scroll through social media searching for clues. Every small detail becomes evidence in a trial where you are both the accused and the judge. This is the spiral of obsession. Once it begins, it is difficult to stop because each unanswered question fuels the next. You imagine scenarios, conversations that never happened, betrayals that have no proof. Your energy, which could be directed toward your own growth, is poured into a void you cannot control. Jung believed this was one of the greatest dangers of ignoring the shadow. When it remains unexamined, it pulls you into compulsions. What you repress returns, not quietly, but with an intensity that hijacks your entire psyche. Modern culture has only sharpened this spiral. In earlier centuries, if a letter went unanswered, weeks might pass before one knew the truth. The long silence gave space for patience, for acceptance, for resignation. Today, technology tempts us with instant connection, and so also with instant despair. A delay of minutes feels like rejection, an unread message feels like abandonment, a change in active now status feels like betrayal. The spiral tightens faster than ever before. Sociologists studying digital dependency have observed how this cycle mirrors addiction. The phone becomes the slot machine. Each refresh, each check of notifications is a pull of the lever, hoping for a reward. When none comes, anxiety spikes, pushing you to pull again. The more you chase, the more you lose. Not money, but energy, dignity, peace. And yet the cycle repeats, because the absence of response feels unbearable. But the deeper danger is not only the wasted energy. It is the way obsession narrows your vision. When you are caught in it, the world shrinks until only one person's response defines your worth. You stop noticing beauty around you, stop tending to your own needs, stop recognizing your own presence. Everything becomes about them, as if they hold the key to your existence. This is the ultimate illusion, believing that another human being has the authority to confirm or deny your value. Jung warned that when we project power onto others, we become their prisoners. The more you obsess, the more you hand over your freedom. The ignored message is no longer just a message. It becomes the measure of your life. And in that state, you cannot see clearly. You cannot distinguish between their silence and your own fear. The only way out of the spiral is to reclaim your attention. Instead of pouring it into the void, redirect it inward. This does not mean pretending not to care. It means noticing the urge to obsess and pausing long enough to ask, what am I truly seeking here? 9 times out of 10, the answer is not their reply. The answer is reassurance, worth, belonging. Things no text or status update can permanently give you. It is a difficult discipline because obsession feels active. It feels like doing something. In reality, it is the opposite. It is wasting energy on what cannot be controlled. True action lies in stepping back, in reclaiming the energy that has been scattered. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation, the moment you stop handing your power to someone else's silence and begin the slow work of turning toward yourself. At some point in the cycle of chasing and obsessing, a moment of clarity may come. You realize that every attempt to fill the silence has only deepened it. You recognize that no amount of pleading or messaging can force a connection with someone who has already stepped away. And then, almost against instinct, you consider the radical act of stepping back, not out of defeat, not out of spite, but out of purpose. This is what it means to disappear with purpose. It is not a tactic to provoke guilt or curiosity. It is an act of reclaiming your energy. By choosing absence, you signal not punishment, but transformation. The silence you create is different from the silence you received. It is deliberate, dignified, and charged with meaning. History offers countless parallels. Generals who pulled back their armies not in retreat, but to draw the enemy out. Religious figures who vanished into deserts and monasteries not to escape the world, but to return renewed. Even political leaders have used withdrawal as power. When George Washington declined a third presidential term, his absence reshaped the very notion of leadership, proving that stepping away could echo louder than clinging to power. In relationships, disappearing with purpose does not mean slamming doors. It means choosing to redirect your presence. Instead of being perpetually available, you invest in pursuits that remind you of who you are apart from the other person. You cultivate friendships, hobbies, studies, even solitude. Your absence is not a void, but a signal. I am more than the one who waits. Psychologically, this act unsettles the one who ignored you. They had grown accustomed to your constant availability, the ease of taking your presence for granted. Suddenly, the background noise is gone. What was once certain is now uncertain. You are no longer orbiting their world, and this shift of gravity forces them to feel the weight of your absence. Yet, and this is crucial, it only has power if your absence is genuine. If you are secretly waiting for their reaction, refreshing your phone in hope, then the energy is still rooted in lack. True disappearance with purpose is not a performance. It is a choice to grow regardless of whether they ever notice. And when they do notice, as often happens, the dynamic changes. They may reach out, curious why you have stepped away. They may even seek to pull you back into old patterns. But by then, if your absence has been purposeful, you are no longer the same. You are not waiting. You are not chasing. You are not depending on their recognition for your worth. Jung would see this as a crucial stage of individuation, the point where the self begins to separate from old compulsions and stand on its own. Disappearing with purpose is not about the other person at all. It is about becoming visible to yourself. When you stop pouring your energy into convincing someone else to see you, you begin to see yourself with new clarity. The paradox is that this kind of absence often speaks louder than words. But the deeper truth is that even if it does not draw them back, it draws you forward. You step out of the role of the desperate seeker and into the role of the centered self. And that shift, whether noticed by others or not, is the foundation of true transformation. There is a strange symmetry to human relationships. Often, it is when you have finally steadied yourself, when you no longer crave their attention, that the person who once ignored you returns. Perhaps it is a text, casual and careless. "Hey, how have you been?" Perhaps it is a call at midnight, heavy with nostalgia. Or perhaps it is something subtler, a comment on your photo, a glance across the room, a faint signal that they suddenly notice what they once dismissed. And in that moment, relief mixes with unease. Your first instinct may be to celebrate. Finally, they see you again. But a deeper question waits beneath the surface. Are they truly returning, or are you being pulled back into the old pattern? Jung taught that life constantly presents us with the same tests until we learn from them. The return of someone who once withdrew is such a test. The real challenge is not whether they come back, but whether you have truly changed in their absence. History is filled with such returns. Think of Odysseus, finally arriving in Ithaca after years of wandering. His return was not a simple homecoming. It was a confrontation with old bonds, old betrayals, and the need to prove his transformation. Or the biblical prodigal son, welcomed home with open arms, but also faced with the uneasy reality that his old life could not simply be resumed as if nothing had happened. In every story of return, the past lingers like a shadow. The question is not whether one returns, but whether one is reborn. When the person who ignored you reappears, it can feel intoxicating. The wound inside whispers, "At last I am worthy again." But here lies the danger. If you accept their presence simply to soothe the wound, you have undone all your growth. You have slipped back into the childlike belief that your worth depends on them. This is why Jung insisted on integration. Unless you have faced and embraced your shadow, you will react to their return from fear rather than strength. The true test is whether you can meet them with calmness, not indifference, not hostility, but steady presence. You may choose to reconnect, but not because you need to. You may choose to walk away, but not because you are bitter. The point is that your choice now comes from wholeness, not from lack. This is not easy. Your unconscious will try to pull you back into old dynamics. You may feel the same rush of anxiety, the same temptation to overgive, to prove yourself, to cling. But if you have done the work of absence, if you have reclaimed your energy, you will recognize the pull for what it is, the echo of an old story, not the command of the present. What matters most in this moment is alignment with the new self you have become. You no longer chase validation. You no longer hinge your peace on their recognition. Instead, you stand rooted in your own worth. If reconciliation happens, it is from a place of strength. If departure continues, it is faced without collapse. Either way, the test of return is not about them. It is about you, whether you will repeat the cycle or rewrite it. In the end, their return is less a gift than a mirror. It reflects back to you the progress you have made, the strength you have cultivated, the shadow you have faced. And if you can remain steady, calm, and whole, then the return, whatever form it takes, becomes not a temptation, but a confirmation. You are no longer ruled by absence. When the storm has passed, when the obsession has quieted, when the absence has been endured, when even the return has been tested, you arrive at the threshold of something far greater than reconciliation. You arrive at integration. Jung called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole, where the fragments of shadow and light are no longer enemies, but parts of the same being. It is here that you discover the deepest liberation. Your worth was never dependent on another's gaze. Think of how fragile life felt at the beginning of this journey. One ignored message, one averted glance, and your entire sense of self seemed to collapse. Every silence was an earthquake, every absence a storm. But now, after turning inward, you begin to see that silence is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It showed you where you were fractured, where the child within still cried, where the shadow still held sway. And instead of running from it, you faced it. This integration does not mean you no longer desire connection. It means your desire is no longer driven by fear. Relationships built on fear of abandonment always wobble because they are built on sand. Relationships built on authenticity, on two whole beings meeting as equals, stand firm. This is the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment says, I need you to complete me. Connection says, I am whole, and I choose to share my wholeness with you. Across cultures, wisdom traditions echo this truth. The Stoics insisted that our peace must never be at the mercy of others' whims. Buddhist teachers taught that craving is the root of suffering, and freedom comes when we loosen its grip. Even the Christian mystics reminded their followers that love must flow from a place of inner abundance, not desperate need. Jung's psychology aligns with all of these voices, showing that true liberation is not found in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Practically, this integration expresses itself in boundaries. You no longer accept behavior that diminishes you, because you understand your value does not require constant proof. You learn to say no without guilt, to walk away without collapse, to stay without clinging. Each act of self-respect reinforces the message, I am enough. And then something subtle but profound begins to happen. Your presence changes. You no longer carry the weight of desperation. You radiate calmness, solidity, and authenticity. Others notice it, even if they cannot explain why. Those who once ignored you may now feel drawn to you. New people may enter your life, sensing the steadiness you have cultivated. But unlike before, their recognition is no longer the prize. It is simply an echo of the truth you already carry. Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet once you do, the terror dissolves. You discover that what you feared, being unseen, being abandoned, was never fatal. It was simply an invitation to turn inward and discover the strength that was always yours. The ignored text, the unanswered call, the averted glance, these become not wounds but reminders that you no longer need external validation to exist fully. This is true liberation, to walk through the world whole, to meet love without fear, to endure silence without collapse, to live not as a beggar of attention, but as a sovereign of your own soul. And from that place, everything changes, not because others finally see you, but because you have finally seen yourself.